Oh, I love that. Love that intro music. Love that intro music. Hello, everyone. I'm back, and happy to welcome you to night 5 of the 12 Beers of Christmas craft beer experience presented by Bruvana. Fun fact, I haven't washed this suit jacket and this shirt since we did our Christmas in July promo. Happy to welcome back my co-host, Laura. Laura, thank you for filling in last night. I have a question. Do you look forward more to breakfast meals or dinner meals at Christmas?
You know, that's a really hard question because this Christmas was special. My fiance's name is also named Brian. And he
Good
made
name.
me breakfast today. So I was like, or today for Christmas. So I was really, really excited. But also, like, you can't beat a Christmas dinner with like the ham and the sweet potatoes and the green bean casserole and everything. So it's kind of like a sentimental breakfast, but I'm probably going to go with the dinner. Probably going to go.
Yeah, I'm gonna say breakfast for me. My mom always makes an awesome Christmas morning breakfast. Shout out to my mom, who's probably in the chat right now. Um, yeah, thanks again a ton for covering for me yesterday. Feeling much better today. Today's host is presented by Theraflu. Theraflu for when you catch the flu. It really, really helps. So
Love it.
feeling better today, ready to drink this beer, and super excited to talk with our guest. Tonight, we're featuring our 5th beer of the year, and we'll be joined by our special guest who not only works at one of the most influential breweries in the country, but also runs a social media account that is teaching the business of craft beer in an approachable and understandable way, while also sharing top quality S tier memes. But first, let's crack our beer. Lots of people in the chat. Shout out to our chat, to everybody. Somebody just said Therabrew. That's amazing. Again, that's why Yins are the best. Shout out to all of you. Somebody said, how do you pronounce? They just want to know how to pronounce this brewery's name. And I always remember by this little moniker, if you want to ask somebody if they're into beer, you just simply ask them, "You into beer?" And that's how you say the name of the brewery. It's
You went
Uinta.
to beer?
Uinta. So
Love it.
we about to get into this beer. I'm just gonna pour this beer
So
before
many
I.
play on words right there. I loved it. No, every time we've
Oof.
had you went to on the streams, whether it be Christmas or BLT, definitely have always loved their beer. So I'm excited to try this. This is a
Yeah.
Munich style lager with juniper berries, 5% ABV, 15 IBUs, and ooh, how pretty she is. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, great beer. Christmas Cheer is the name of it, and as Laura said, Munich style lager with juniper berries, juniper berries are very common in the state of Utah. Um, yeah,
So good. And yeah, this is a Christmas lager brewed for the season of short days and magical nights, which I absolutely love that. Toasted oats and Munich malts add depth and complexity, while juniper berries gift a touch of herbal brightness. So definitely going to talk about this with our guest in a little bit. But first, a little bit of housekeeping here before we dive into everything else.
housekeeping.
Yes. We're going to be hanging out for the next 30 to 40 minutes. We've got our chat mod, Adrian, in the house. Whoop, whoop. And he's going to be looking out for our comments and questions. So remember to put all of your questions in the Q&A section, okay? So not the comment section, the Q&A section, because those are going to be the questions that we're going to look at to answer later on in the stream. If we have some extra time at the end, we're going to dive into those. So put them in the Q&A, and just also make sure to put the settings into everyone instead of just the panelists and hosts. If you put it to everyone will be able to see. So we all want to see what you guys are talking about. So definitely make sure that is in your settings.
Someone just Peter in the chat says thanks for the stickers. Much like our good friend of the show and friend in real life, Julie, you're big into making stickers into magnets, right?
Yes, I love making stickers into magnets.
Yeah.
And I also make the can labels into magnets. So this can from Uinta, you can't peel. You can peel. There is a sticker on there. I thought there's a sticker on there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to peel this off. I'm going to cut out my favorite part and put it onto a magnet. And I do it for all the other nights as well. So this was night 1. I'm really excited to make this one into a magnet as well. So it's like my little side hobby. I really should put some pictures up because my fridge is like plastered in these magnets. So little tangent there. Yeah.
Wow. Well, let's get into it. Please join me in welcoming the Chief Strategy Officer at Revolution Brewing Company and the man behind the Beer Aficionado account, Doug Valicki. Thanks for joining us, Doug.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me.
First of all, thoughts on this beer from Uinta.
I just took my first sip, but I'm very much enjoying it. Reminds me of a beer a style we get to see a lot of come Oktoberfest time, and it's a little bit of a darker rendition with a little more festiveness to it for the season. So very into it.
Yeah, it's good to see a holiday beer that isn't a spice Belgian ale.
Agree.
So let's start with your background in beer. How did you come to be CSO at Illinois' largest craft brewery?
Sure. Well, I started somewhat by luck and somewhat by interest in beer, but I started working for a company called Reyes Holdings in 2009, who is among other things, the largest distributor of beer in the country. So I say among other things because they're a big family office logistics company that has other businesses outside of beer too. So I wasn't exclusively working in the beer industry, but I got a lot of exposure to it. I had a role in finance. I was like their internal auditor, consultant, problem solver, kind of like a SWAT team whenever something would go wrong or they'd buy a new company. They'd send me in to clean up a mess or figure something out. Got to do a little bit of everything and figure out how the beer distribution business works. And I was there 8 years, so I worked there till 2016. About halfway through that is when craft beer really started taking off and becoming a big thing in Chicago. Chicago kind of broke late with craft breweries, not as late as some cities, but in 2010 there was only like 5 or 6 breweries, and now there's a few hundred. But it was really that 2010 to 2014 era when they really started popping up like crazy in the city and the suburbs. And I caught the bug while working at this company that at a very large level, got beer from point A to point B and helped breweries grow their brand. And craft beer started becoming more and more of an interest of theirs. They started bringing in craft breweries to their distributorships. And so it became a little bit part of company culture. And then I just got really into it as like a beer hobbyist, and I wanted to work on the beer side of the business. And I just, tried to figure out a few ways I could like help out my resume and show off how I was how into beer I was. And so I started like an Instagram account, then later added a blog that was originally meant to just like kind of like how a lot of people start theirs, document my journey and really just show how passionate I was by trying to come up with something unique to say about beer, a single beer or the beer industry or something happening someplace I went every day if possible. And I've been kind of doing that since 2013. When I added a blog, I made that more of like a deep dive industry focus. And that's what got onto some breweries. There wasn't a lot like that out there, so it wasn't hard to get some eyeballs on it. So being someone on the distribution side who normally you don't hear from them with something to say, got some breweries to check out my blog. And that's how I kind of got tapped on the shoulder by someone at Revolution and offered me the role of CFO at the company. So that's how I made the jump from 8 years in beer distribution to working at Revolution. So worked there for 4 years. And then during that time, there's always like chances to help out the marketing team, whether it was like pitching in on an idea, helping pour at a beer fest. With social media, you always need new content every day. So, whoever's working social media would be foolish to not at least hear anyone out anytime there's an idea for a fun post you could do. So I was always, because I had kind of like already been doing this for years on my own, I was so eager to, share some ideas I had for what the brewery could do. And over time, somebody left and they needed, while they were gone, someone to like oversee social media just in the meantime. So I was, of course, like, me, I'll do it. So I just kind of like that and other areas of marketing just over time just kept raising my hand saying, I can figure that out. And that eventually led to, our owner one day saying to me during the pandemic, which was a great time where people were very open-minded to career shifts more than ever. He said, do you want to just kind of do this full time? At this point, we had a great, apprentice of mine who was kind of ready to step up in the finance realm. So I did this career shift into marketing, and now I'm pretty much full time running the marketing team at Revolution and pretty much completely out of finance. So I kind of moved into craft beer and changed careers through that. It was kind of like this open canvas I had of a way to kind of change the direction I was going by being at a craft brewery. So I try to weave as much of that into the content that I do. So I still keep those personal accounts going that have shifted in focus over time. Originally they were like me trying to get in the industry, and now it's turned into more of like me trying to make the content that I wish I had access to when I was trying to figure out a way to get into it.
I was going to say you making fun of the industry now, but that's a better way to put it.
You got to be able to laugh at yourself, right?
But isn't that true though? Like I feel like I do that too. I'm always looking for the thing that I need and I can't find it. So I'm like, should I just make it myself? And it sounds like you basically did that yourself, which is amazing. And I know Brian has a question coming up about social media, but before we dive further into that, I would like to talk a little bit more on a different topic first. So tonight's beer is an adaptation of a classic Munich style lager. So traditional styles are great, but what importance do you think new styles, especially like the cold IPA, have for the market moving forward?
I think they're very important. I think the style of a beer in terms of like what it's named has a big, is a big opportunity to sell the beer to someone looking onto it. So some very traditional foreign names to styles of beer often have a tough time getting traction beyond the diehard fans who've traveled to Europe because they see the name, they don't know what it means. And oftentimes it's just the most simple, approachable, beautiful style like a Kolsch, but they see Kolsch, they don't know what it means, and they assume it's something that's like a 10% Belgian ale that's like a big beer, and it couldn't be further from the truth. But even though you want to believe that like everybody is like will take the time to figure out what it is, that's just like not how enough people sadly shop. So sometimes the beer style can be like a second extension of the beer's name, where you have a chance to further explain what it is. So if we used like cold IPA as an example, I was very open to this from the time I heard about it, knowing that there would be a ton of pushback from people who are, like technocrats and wanted to be everything to be like technically exactly correct. I thought cold IPA was interesting because it's, I believe what cold IPAs have become a hoppy lager that's really like of the strength of an IPA. Though they end up tasting almost more like an IPA than a lager, but with some, nuance to them. So by putting IPA in the title, that is at least going to draw in an IPA fan, which a lot of times is the goal here. How do we make all these IPA fans, how do we bridge them over to lager? And, a defense of the cold IPA, and I could come up with plenty of arguments the other way too, I get it. But, the argument for it is that like this tells them, if you like IPAs, hey, you'll probably like this. They don't really understand what the cold is, but they're at least intrigued. And then they at least hopefully a lot of times prompts the question, why is it called a cold IPA? And that opens the door for breweries who are making them to explain to this potential customer, oh, it's because it's used, it uses a lager yeast, which ferments at cold temperatures. And this has a lot of aspects of an IPA. So we're calling it a cold IPA, something like that. And it's like, oh, so then it just teaches the idea of ales ferment at warm temperatures, lagers ferment at cold temperatures. Most people don't even know that. And that's okay. But it's a quick bite-sized educational opportunity in the style name that I'm very open to. And then there's this other argument I have, which is that the term IPA has transcended its original meaning of India, pale, and including ale. IPA, those three letters are now, it's become so broad that it's like, it could be anything. It's like a hoppy beverage in the way it's actually used in practice. I'm not saying what the BJCP guidelines would say, but in practice, what it stands for, a lot of people don't even know what it stands for. They just know that they like IPAs, and they just order, give me the IPA. Which one we have, I don't care. Just whichever one you recommend, just give me the IPA. So the IPA has almost like transcended its original definition. So I kind of like jumped right into the cold IPA topic, but that's just like a good example of I stay open-minded of these things. I don't like to be the curmudgeonly person that's saying, no, it's not an ale, so you can't call it that. I'm like, I get, if it works, I'm all for it.
Exactly. And also
So
props for just bringing up curmudgeon. Like, thank you for that.
It was either that or crotchety. And I think curmudgeon sounds better. Crotchety sounds weird. So
both of those are perfectly cromulent words. So what I'm hearing, number one, is good style names like that are approachable. It's approachable to a wide variety of drinkers, especially the largest margin of craft beer drinkers, which is IPA drinkers, which I think is 60% of the market right now. And number two, it's an opportunity for education. And I think those are really the things that can set craft beer apart in the future. We'll get into that in a second. But the follow-up I really wanted to take is, why do you think brewed IPA flopped so much and compared to cold IPA, which I feel like is 2023 could really be a year for cold IPA. And I feel like it's setting up to be. Why didn't, in your opinion, why don't you think brewed IPA went a similar way?
So brewed IPA had the unfortunate timing of coming right after hazy IPA had blown up bigger than anybody ever gave it credit for being able to get. And so many breweries thought they could resist hazy IPA and be like, that'll pass. That's just a flash in the pan. And it wasn't. And then they realized how many years of, planting the seeds for a future, winner in their portfolio of beers. So many breweries knew they missed it, that they told themselves, well, we're not going to miss the next one. And the next one happened to be brewed IPA. And when brewed IPA just got some buzz as just being a new thing that had IPA at the end, all of a sudden, literally everybody was hyper aware and like, we got to make one of these. And everybody immediately was like not doing the research on what this original brewed IPA that was brewed at a pretty small brew pub in San Francisco. They didn't even care what went into that initial recipe. They heard, wait, I'm sorry, champagne like? Okay, well, let's take that a step further. Let's get champagne grapes. Let's plow as many grapes into this recipe as we can. Let's go nuts. Let's make it a double brewed IPA. All of this, the style went through this silly growth curve in like 3 months of pushing the ridiculousness of what it originally set out to be so fast, and never had a set bar of what a brewed IPA is supposed to be. And the original dry ones that were kind of made the way they're supposed to be, just an IPA that's extra refreshing, it goes down, easier and just finishes cleaner than any we were used to, was a compelling concept. It might not gain the untapped check-in crowd. It might not grab their attention to a degree like hazy IPA does from the standpoint of wanting to check a bunch of these off in experimentation, but it was a good beer. But it got so silly so fast, and everybody made one. There were too many, too fast, and it exploded. And then everybody learned their lesson and they all went away. That's my revisionist history of the brewed IPA.
I think it's a fair point. When you saw cold IPA came out, I believe in my mind, I always credit Wayfinder in Portland as kind of the brewery that led the charge on that beer. And they kind of put out information on it immediately when they put it out. So I think maybe they took a similar stance to the opinion that you just shared and said, hey, let's get out in front of this and make sure people are representing the style properly. So I became familiar with your social media accounts mainly beer aficionado because of the beer memes you were posting. Like many people, we were looking for new beer memes, and you still do memes, but you also have released a lot of educationally focused videos like where does your beer money go, why variety packs cost more, and the hidden costs of barrel aged beer. How do you find the balance between that serious educational content and the fun silly content?
Someone, it might have been Gary Vee or somebody, maybe like 5 years ago, I heard put it very simply that every piece of successful content is one of two things. It's either informative or entertaining. And I was like, when I first heard that, I was like, well, no, there's got to be, no, yeah, you're right. They are pretty much those two things. And so it's such a simple way to boil it down. And then, I like to challenge myself. I get bored if I don't. And so I like to try to find ways to make them both, because I say, well, if these are the two winning pillars of making successful content, then what if you can make one piece of content be both of those things? So that's a big thing I try to do, not necessarily in every post. Sometimes there will be just one or just the other. But my favorite kinds of content to make are ones that kind of tote the line of both, making people laugh and also teaching them something at the same time. I don't want to ever be known for memes. And I honestly make memes whenever I don't have time to make real content.
Actual
So,
content.
I can
It's
make
easy,
them.
yeah.
I have so many ideas for memes that I can make in like 30 seconds that it's, when I put my kids to bed, I often have to like sit in the dark on a beanbag in their room until they fall asleep. And that's when I make most of my memes, is when I'm just in there and just like goofing around on my phone, trying to wait for my 7-year-old or 4-year-old to fall asleep. So those are just kind of what I consider throwaway posts, but I try to make them as often as I can more industry focused, but not necessarily. I'm a beer fan too. I buy beer from all my favorite breweries all the time. So I like to make fun of barley wines. We sell probably more barley wines than maybe any brewery in the country. It's possible. And so I like to make barley wine jokes that just kind of play off the fact that we sell all this barley wine, and barley wines, every time I have a barley wine, I regret it the next day. So I like to have some that are just like silly posts like that. But my favorite ones are like an industry topic that nobody else is really making the jokes on, because there's a lot of craft beer punchlines that are just overdone right now. It's not that they weren't funny when they first started, but everybody's made the joke and it's like, I'm good. Like the fact that, every IPA is Citra, Mosaic, and Galaxy, or is it Galaxy, Mosaic, and Citra? Like, that joke, I get it. It was funny, but it's past. I've seen enough punchlines on that. How come, I try to like think outside the box. What's the thing that nobody's poked fun at yet? And that gets harder. And again, I like the challenge of that. So that's what I use my memes for, is what can I like make a jab at that hasn't already been done.
I love that. And you hear those jokes many times in a row, but I mean, you can still appreciate them. They're like dad jokes. Like, they're always going to be funny just a little bit, where you're like, it's sparking your spirit and making you happy. So definitely keep them coming. And it's really good for engagement too, because that's how people are going to really connect with you and your audience. And obviously, this is by being funny and being new and having those new ideas, fresh ideas, and really bringing them in. So then once they get latched in by the fun memes, then you're going to throw them the real content. And then that's where they're actually going to learn something and be able to build on their own knowledge through what you put out. So I think it's really good balance that you do with the memes and the educational.
That is incredibly well said. And something I love preaching is that, think of content. There's also two types of content, in the sense that some are going to get you a new follower, and then others allow you to go deep with your existing followers. And a lot of times it's one or the other. And that's perfectly said.
Exactly. Yes. And speaking of, so let's dive a little bit further into that serious content. Okay. So what are some costs that factor into beer pricing that the general consumer doesn't necessarily consider?
Pretty much it's been wild during COVID to learn and see it unfold, what can happen when there's a shortage of a particular item. And what can happen to the cost of aluminum. One that wasn't talked about as much during COVID was the cost of paperboard. So any brewery that uses boxes that like a 12-pack would come in, your contracts with these companies, there's like a fixed part of what you pay, and then there's a variable part that's like pinged to what the like commodity price of a given good is. So when there's a shortage of things, whether it's because they can't get them or something else going on in the world, you're going to get hit on the bills. It might take a quarter or so for it to cycle through, but we were paying more, and we have been paying more for just about everything. There are things that people are often fascinated with barrel-aged beers, and an example that that a lot of people don't think about is the space that barrels take up, and how you kind of have to look at, like, when we were a new brewery in 2012, we moved into a space that had a lot of extra space. And so at that point, we could fill as many barrels as we wanted. Now, we didn't have a reputation for them, so we weren't filling too many, but space wasn't a problem because we were new, we were still growing, and we moved into a space we had a lot of room to grow into. And so the value of that space wasn't worth anything to us. It was like, well, we have the space here. If we put barrels there, there's no real cost to that. We're paying for this building regardless. But then all of a sudden, go 10 years into the future, we're like cramped on space. We're out of space. Every decision we make is if we do this with the space, what could we have done with it? Is there a revenue generating piece for this? Would we have been better off getting some offsite storage at farther away outside the city at a cheaper cost? All of a sudden, we're in that predicament now where, any more barrel-aged beers that we want to do, those are great, money makers, but they take up space, and they take up space for a year, 2 years,
right,
sometimes 5 years. Some of these we let go for a long time. So having to think about that part of it is a big deal. Another part is waste. Like when you do a barrel-aged beer, for example, this is especially true of breweries doing cans, you often need to place the order for those cans months before you're going to actually empty the barrels. And so you have to buy a certain number of these cans that could cost like 30 cents a piece. And by the time you blend the beer, empty and get it all going, run it through your canning line, you really don't know how many cans you're going to get. You try to do your best to guess, and you don't want to be short. You don't want to have beer that doesn't have a can to go into. So you end up buying too many cans, and because you'd rather pay for the can that you don't need than have beer that doesn't have a can to go into. Right. So you end up being conservative and buying too many, but sometimes you're throwing $1,000 worth of empty cans that you're not going to make this beer again, or you're not going to make it for 3 years. So it's not worth like storing these cans, and you just throw them away. There's always waste like that is important to build in when you're work for the brewery, when you're in finance and you're budgeting for this. You tend to think of it as like trying to get you think you plan for it as exact, but nothing is exact. You never know how much. And this goes for any specialty beer. When you're buying the labels that go on a can, you need to order those labels, and you don't know what the yield of this beer is going to be. Breweries get thrown off by, there's all kind of different factors where you brew a 50 barrel batch, and you could end up with 34 barrels of finished beer at the end, or it could be 38 barrels, but that could be hundreds and hundreds of these labels that cost a quarter each. And again, there could be another $500 or $1,000 that you really have no home for. Yes, there are people that like stickers. Yes, you can give them away, but it's really a loss to the brewery. So those are just some examples.
Yeah,
hitting costs, I'd say.
Definitely. And I loved it in the chat. Nobody said, great topic for tonight's beer, because it's seasonal. So seasonal beers really come into play with that. Like, how much beer are you actually going to brew? How many labels do you need? And so if you're having a recurring flagship beer coming after each other every single month, you're brewing it out, it's a little bit easier. But when you have these seasonal beers, you don't know exactly how much is going to come out. Definitely comes into play even more so than just those regular beers too.
Yeah, and when a brewery prints the can, like on the can underneath this, when they print it on, you always have to buy typically a full truckload of these. And a lot of breweries in a season for a seasonal could only sell, let's say, half of a truckload. So they buy the full truck, they use half of it, and then they store the other half. But again, if you're like us, you're in the city of Chicago, that's a half a truck. That's a decent amount of square space that you're paying like rent on, whether unless you own the building or whatever. But like that's a decent amount of real estate that this kind of half truck of cans that you don't need for another year is taking up. And if you want to store them outside, then you got to have a truck or hire a truck to move them. And then that's going to cost you hundreds, if not like $1,000 of just like all the fees of moving it. So exactly.
Yeah. And nobody did clarify in the chat. They meant that the can sticker was printed over the can. Yes. I totally understand that. Obviously there was some numbers issues there, but it looks pretty still. It's okay. It's okay, guys.
They made it work.
And we also had a question from the chat. Brian, what are you drinking now? Somebody saw you pour some, so you got to share. What's the beer you're drinking?
I had another City Barrel Christmas IPA,
Nice.
so that's
love
what
that
I'm
one.
enjoying. No, Doug, we haven't talked much about Revolution, the brewery that you do your day job at, but I had some Straight Jacket on Christmas Eve, and it was gorgeous printed can, and just to hear you talk through all of that planning that goes into that makes even me as a beer nerd, as somebody that works in the industry, have so much more appreciation for how much forethought and planning had to go into, from the production aspect, the production side, the blender side, the marketing side, the packaging side, to make that come to fruition for that one single beer it's just amazing. It's
Thank you.
And the beer was phenomenal, by the way. It's absolutely one of the best barley wines I've had in my life.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
So let's talk about the future. What do you see as the biggest challenges for small breweries in 2023? And maybe separately, what is the biggest challenge for larger regional breweries like Revolution?
Yeah, I think 2023, there's some fear out there that the economy is slipping a little bit, and we went from a lot of people having an excess of savings, and a lot of people weren't going out during COVID, and so a lot of people saved up money. And now, as we've seen inflation really playing out, I think it sounds like a lot of those savings are going the other way, and there's a lot of people who are going to be looking to save money because they have, unfortunately, less of it. So we're definitely seeing that hit the craft beer market, not in a way that's like, completely devastating, but like let's say a 10% hit. Just like if you look at the stock price of any company, for the most part, everybody's down from where they were, over the last year or two. It's the same thing is happening to craft beer sales. A little more restraint is being shown with spending, and that includes a luxury good like craft beer. Now, there's always going to be trading down going on, like there's different prices of craft beer at every level. So if depending on what tier you're at, could you just be all of a sudden getting people coming from a price tier above you down to where you're at? Sure, there's always going to be some of that. But in general, it's going to be a time where you got to figure out some creative ways to weather the storm and be able to, survive a year or two where things aren't exactly on the up and up. And then the big challenge to me is like, how do you create the next wave of interest? There was like just an insane number of people that went from not knowing or caring about craft beer to being so into it at the beginning of the last decade, in like that 2012 to 2014, 15 range. The influx of craft beer fans that came in that time period has been like unmatched. And I think it's really like leveled off. There's still new people interested always coming in, but not at that rate that can sustain the number of breweries we have. So trying to, pay attention to what the next kind of generation of potential beer fans or drinkers, social drinkers, potential people that would be attracted to this as a, hobby, like as a home brewer, like what, the same old might not work. So what could work next? What are ways we could generate interest from a new group of fans. How you do that, I don't think there's ever going to be one answer. I think everybody needs to kind of go about it their own way in their own locality. And local is going to become, it's as important as you get right now, but it's going to continue to funnel that way of how can you resonate with the people nearest to you. And breweries have to like really start thinking outside the box, I think, and not just expect anything easy to come to them anymore. They're going to have to earn it more than they ever have.
Awesome.
Yep.
But I
Love
think
it.
things are going to
Great
be
answers.
great. I just think you need to have that kind of mindset that like,
Right.
this is not going to be easy. This is going to be hard. We need to work harder than we have before to do it. And I think some of the most creative new ideas are going to come during this time where the economy is in a little bit of a pinch. And it might be 6 months, it might be 24 months before things really start going the other way in a positive direction. We don't know. You just have to kind of have that longer term mindset of how we get through this, but also decide, are you gonna hunker down and be really conservative and just survive, or are you going to use this time to be aggressive and outthink everyone else and be the most compelling brewery in your area? It's going to be we're going to see a little bit of both. I think we're going to see some breweries who have the flexibility to get aggressive, and we're going to see some get a little tighter, get a little conservative.
Definitely. And we've got maybe a time for maybe one or two questions from the chat, I'm thinking. So I'm just scrolling through here, and just to bring it to light spirits, holiday spirits. I saw this question and I was like, I would love to know. So if you were to compare this beer that we're drinking right now to a Christmas movie, what movie would that be and why? I would love to know.
Oh,
Brian, you've moved on to another beer, but you have to answer this too. We're all going to answer this one, you guys. And if you have any questions, throw them in the chat really quick. We might be able to get to them. We'll see. I'll go first. First if you want me to. So I saw this question and I immediately thought of Elf. It's one of my favorite Christmas movies. And I specifically thought of the scene where he is eating his spaghetti with like syrup and all of the candy on top of it. And I was like, a nice juniper lager might be really good with that type of meal in Elf. So that's the thing that first popped into my mind. I think because that popped into my mind was the reason I had to ask the question. So may have cheated there a little bit.
Okay, I'll go with A Christmas Story because it reminds me of when Randy is sitting at the table with his plate of meatloaf and he doesn't want to eat it. And his parents say, Randy, show me what the little piggies do. And then he just snorts a few times and then he just goes to town on it. This beer is delicious. And I just want to go, if the glass it was shaped more like a bowl, I would go full Randy style on this delicious Munich lager. So thank you again for sharing it with me.
Love it. How about you, Brian? You got to answer.
I think because we're talking to Doug and we've talked so much about Revolution, Chicago is on my mind. So Home Alone. Also probably because that's my favorite movie, but this beer is very comforting. And that movie is so comforting to me around Christmas time, or any time of the year when I watch it. So the warm, fuzzy feeling I get while I watch Home Alone, I get while I'm drinking this as well. So that's my answer. I have a question from the chat that I want to pose to you. Doug, what are your thoughts on breweries' membership only beers that are never available to the general public?
I think those are going to be harder and harder to pull off. I think they made a lot of sense for breweries to sell memberships over the last, call it 5 years. I think I get why they existed. Breweries wanted to guarantee they're spending all this time and money on, especially these barrel-aged beers, and getting the money in the door at the beginning of like a year, and you pay like, say, $300 for a year-long membership, and you get 10 special barrel-aged beers out of it throughout the course of the year. That exclusivity to those beers is what makes a consumer willing to foot that kind of money a year in advance of getting some of these So that was a premise that always made sense to me. If you could pull it off, if you had the cachet to offer some member only beers that meant something to people, and had, a lot of cases, these are people that like to trade beers. They like to get a few rare ones so that they can use them to get some rare beers that they wouldn't otherwise be able to get on the other side of the country. But nowadays, there's so many great barrel programs, and there's a lot of people that love barrel aged beer, but there's almost too much of it, that rare beer is becoming less and less rare, that beer is becoming so accessible, which is a great win for the consumer that doesn't want to have to go wait in line, doesn't want to have to commit $300 a year in advance of getting them. They just want to be able to get great beer. There's so much more of those situations happening that I think it's going to make member only beers harder and harder to pitch to your customers. I'm not saying there aren't a few breweries around in different points of the country that still have that kind of cachet, but it is starting to wear off a little bit. And you're just able to go to the bottle shop and find beers that 5 years ago you had to trade for or pay hundreds of dollars for, and now you can buy it for $20 and it's just sitting there right there. And then if you want to buy another one, you go in 2 weeks later and there's still some there. So you don't have to be you don't have to be loading up like you used to. Not that you ever did, but people, kind of got carried away and probably bought too much special beer, and there weren't enough special occasions to drink them all.
All right. Well, I very much appreciate that answer. Laura, I think we have time for one more question from the chat, and I would like you to pick which one.
Oh, so much pressure. This is so exciting. Oh my goodness. I'm just gonna, okay, there's 5 in there. I'm not even gonna look at them. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. Cheryl Brown, your question is being asked. What kind of cheese would pair with this beer? Oh, it moved. Oh, Adrian moved it before I was done reading. What kind of cheese would you pair with this, or Christmas beers in general? What kind of cheese would you pair? That was totally random. I didn't even read the other questions.
One of my favorite cheeses to pair with, I love pairing this with sour beer, but it would also work well with this for slightly different reasons, but is a English cheddar, which is very, very different from a standard cheddar. So if you've not had it, be prepared for something a little more unique, and really does not, to me, resemble, like the cheddar, like a American Wisconsin cheddar. But I think that would pair well with this. It's a little bit, it's got a little bit of a, I don't know, funk to it. I'm not a cheese expert in describing cheeses, but
you're not a cheesemonger.
I'm not. There you go, monger. I'm not. But that's what I would do. And I think that's a winner. If you're open to some kind of slightly out there flavors in cheese, that one is great with really any beer, but especially a sour beer or like a Belgian Lambic. English cheddar wins for me.
Yeah. And look, there were some people who were saying something sharp, Frumenda, Dilhavarti, cheddar. So there's a couple different people speaking up in the chat. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Yeah, I would definitely say something sharp. That would be my go-to.
Yeah. Doug, thank you so much for joining us. Shout out to the terrible towel behind you, fellow Yenzers. Anything to plug before we get out of here?
No, if anyone wants to follow my antics, Instagram and TikTok is where I'm most active at Beer Aficionado, and then Twitter is at Beer Cruncher. I'm always happy to have a dialogue and try to make you laugh, try to teach you something as often as I can scratch together some time. So hope to find some of you on there. And thanks for watching. Thank you both for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Oh, thanks, Doug, for coming on here and sharing your thoughts, putting up with us. No.
You're easy.
Well, thanks everybody for joining us for night 5 of the 12 Beers of Christmas Craft Beer Experience presented by Brewvana. We'll be back tomorrow with another great beer and an awesome guest to talk about how we can make the beer industry a welcoming place for everyone. Cheers. and good night, everybody.